Well, unlike previous speakers to this statement, as the Minister will have anticipated from my questions to the First Minister earlier on, my party will not be supporting this measure. That's not to say that we don't support the aim, which is to cut the problems which flow from excessive drinking. But we do not think that this measure is likely to achieve that, and even to the extent that it does, it will do so at the extent with the effect of imposing unacceptable costs upon the overwhelming majority of people who drink, like myself, who are not regarded as problem drinkers. Well, others may regard me as a problem, but they'll be for different reasons than drink. And will she confirm the figures which are quoted on the BBC website about the impact of this measure, that it is under a 50p formula likely to increase the price of a typical can of cider to £1, a bottle of wine to at least £4.69, and a typical litre of vodka to more than £20? Because I think it is vitally important that the public at large realise now, before we even begin debating this measure properly, what the likely impact of it is likely to be. The Minister says that it's aimed at problem drinkers, not at the general population at large, but these are the people who are least likely to be affected by a minimum price for alcohol, not the people who are mostly likely to be affected. We know from research which has been done that what we might call problem drinkers are price sensitive between brands, so that if you increase the price of one, they'll switch to another. But there's no evidence whatsoever for showing that they will reduce their consumption of alcohol overall, still less to become teetotalers. The price elasticity demand for a real problem drinker is almost by definition zero. It'll have no impact upon his or her drinking. One of the issues which is important, of course, is the public order implications of excessive drinking, especially in city centres. We all know the problems of war zones in city centres on Friday and Saturday nights. So what matters is not so much the overall consumption of alcohol. You can be a non-drinker for 5 days of the week and a binge drinker at the weekend. You can have a drink after work and a pleasant conversation and then go home for 5 days a week and then decide to get hammered at the weekend. This measure is not likely to have the slightest impact, I think, upon binge drinkers who are there for that specific purpose. They want to get hammered, and the difference of a few pounds is very unlikely to make any difference to their social behaviour. The Minister has mentioned international evidence for the claims that she's made. I'm actually not aware of any evidence internationally and academically on this specific problem of the impact of minimum prices upon problem drinkers. It is very important not to make the logical fallacy of post hoc ergo propter hoc and look at the health statistics on the one hand, and then ascribe them to legislative measures which might have taken place, as though there are no other factors which might have influenced them. We know that in recent years there has been significant reduction in the problems created by alcohol. This is certainly the case in Scotland, and nobody can prove, and indeed I think it isn't even logical, that the minimum price legislation which the Scottish Government would like to see has been responsible for that. As regards the Canadian example, which is specifically mentioned in this statement, Canada is a very, very different market from Britain, because virtually all liquor which is sold in Canada is state-controlled or state-regulated in a way which certainly isn't in this country, and they don't have a minimum price system such as the one which is being proposed anyway. They have a reference price system which is different for different drinks and different in different provinces of Canada. So it's very, very difficult from the Canadian evidence, so far as it's undisputed, to draw any conclusions for the type of legislation which is now being proposed for here in Wales. There is another aspect which nobody else has mentioned so far this afternoon. Wales has a long border and a lot of people live quite close to it. Particularly in North East Wales, Chester and Liverpool are right on the doorsteps. What is the impact that this is going to have upon sellers of alcohol in areas like that? It'd be very easy, especially now we can order online, to order from, say, Sainsbury's across the border in England and have it delivered in Wales. The minimum price legislation which is proposed here isn't going to apply to that. So for a variety of reasons, which we'll follow up in more detail when this bill comes to be debated in due course, there are flaws in the logic behind it which undermine its very purpose. And what we should be looking at is how to take measures to combat the ill effects upon society and indeed upon individuals of excessive alcohol consumption, but not to penalise the many in order to try and fail to help the few.
Minister.
I thank you very much for those questions, and I do look forward to continued robust discussion and debate as the bill moves forward to the scrutiny stages, and I'm sure that we'll be certainly having a strong discussion in terms of the evidence base that underpins the proposals that we are making. I think it's fair to say that it is a novel approach, and I think that we both would recognise that. We have evidence that where alcohol price has increased and that increase has been passed on to individuals, then consumption does decrease and alcohol-related harms further decrease. That's the evidence that we have, and I think that that's quite compelling evidence. However, as I say, we recognise this as a quite radical, novel approach. So we have committed to publishing, after a period of 5 years, a report on the operation and the effect of the Act during that period, and we'll be commissioning a full evaluation and review of the impacts of minimum unit pricing in Wales, monitoring a wide variety of indicators where we would hope to see changes, such as the number of hospital admissions as a result of alcohol misuse, deaths from alcohol, and longer-term reductions in psoriasis and other of the measurable health issues that are attributable to alcohol. But we've also included in the legislation a sunset clause as well, because we want to make sure that the legislation is delivering what we want it to achieve. And although, as we know, the Scottish Government passed the Act in 2012, they haven't been able to bring it into force. So you're quite right in saying that no other country in the UK has implemented a minimum unit price for alcohol. But based on what other countries tell us, we are confident that it will deliver significant health gains, but as I say, we do need to be confident the legislation is working, so the sunset clause is inserted within the bill. You asked me to confirm the prices of alcohol quoted on the BBC website if the minimum unit price was set at 50p, and of course it will be set through regulations which will be coming before the Assembly in due course, should the bill pass through the Assembly. Well, a bottle of wine at £4.49, that would contain the best part of 9 units, so yes, that would be correct. A pint of lager, for example, would contain 2 units, so again 50p times 2, so we would have £1 for that. And the bottle of spirits, which is quoted on the website, is actually a litre bottle, so that would be selling for £20, whereas I think most people tend to buy spirits in smaller bottles than litre bottles. The cross-border issues which you describe are ones which we're very alive to as well. We do know that different regimes in England and Wales could have an impact on consumer behaviour, but that really would depend on people's willingness and their ability to travel, along with really the price differential compared to the cost of the transport that they would have to incur as well. And cross-border shopping already exists, as we know, but we believe the impact of introducing a minimum unit price will be minimal. And this is because for the majority of the Welsh population, purchasing in England would incur a cost in time and travel, and the cost is likely to outweigh any savings on the price of alcohol. And actually, people who do consume alcohol at harmful and hazardous levels are tending to be purchasing alcohol for immediate consumption, so that would obviously reduce the incentive to be travelling as well. The First Minister is clear that this is primarily a piece of public health legislation. However, there are potential impacts elsewhere, and we do anticipate that it will have an impact on crime. For example, a 50p minimum unit price was estimated to result in a 4.7% reduction in violent crime, and a 4.6% reduction in criminal damage and a 4.6% reduction in robbery, burglary and theft as well. So benefits beyond just the physical benefits. And to return to the first point you made, which was the one about people who live in poverty and people on low incomes being affected by this legislation. People who live in poverty who are much more likely to be abstaining from any alcohol at all and much more likely to be consuming alcohol at low levels. The research does suggest that for people who are harmful and hazardous drinkers, people who are on a low income or living in deprived areas are more likely to suffer from a long-term illness as a result of drinking too much alcohol. And so a minimum unit price can potentially reduce the levels of harmful and hazardous drinking in these communities, meaning the risk of alcohol-related harm would be reduced as well. And a very stark statistic that I came across in preparing for this bill was that in recent years, alcohol-attributable mortality rates in the most deprived communities for males are 3 times higher than in the least deprived areas. And that, to me, says that this legislation provides us with an opportunity to address what is a very strong issue of health inequalities. And I don't think it's okay that we should accept poorer health outcomes for people who live in our poorer communities.
John Griffiths.